Okay. All right. My name's Frank Chase. I am 62 years old. I was born July 14th, 1962. And I've lived here in Windermere all of my life. And my family's been here for a couple of generations and was in the citrus business, not in town, but just outside of town in Ononworth Grove. So back to when I was born in 1962. The town was it was 17 years after the end of World War II, and there were a lot of retired military officers, more officers in town that had moved here after the war, and so a lot of there's a lot of stories that I remember based, around those types of people growing up, but. And then we were also impacted by Lockheed Martin early before I can really remember. And a lot of my friends had, some of my friends had family that worked there. And then later in the 70s, we were impacted by maybe even 69. I'm not sure, even earlier. I don't, but Disney was a big impact. And we had a ton of families move into Windermere since we were the back door to Disney. So that came from California and totally changed our what our school looked like. So, which was California was extremely advanced compared to Florida as far as the educational system back then. So, but this was a small town. It was dirt roads, just like it is now. There was no traffic on Main Street. You could, it was rare to see cars in the early days. And then as we got into elementary school, there was a little more traffic probably, but it was all surrounded by citrus groves and the lakes. And we were just kind of in the middle of nowhere with a train that came through usually once a day, at least Monday through Friday, I think, and came in and went back out and went all the way down to Dr. Phillips, I think, maybe even Kissimmee sometimes. They usually came back the same day, just delivering odds and ends. It wasn't a massive train or anything. It was a few cars typically. And anyway, we also spent a lot of time on the lakes growing up with John boats, and travel was all by foot or by bicycle for us as kids. And we didn't spend a lot of time indoors like kids today. We were outside as soon as we could get outside, get home from school, try to, if you actually were doing any homework, you just tried to get outside as quick as you could. So, and then Hartsfield was a place we would all congregate, at least the guys would, and sometimes the girls too. It was at the bottom of Second Avenue, between First and Second Avenue, at the bottom of that hill. Is that Forest, and between Second and First, and there was a big open field where there are now four houses, I believe, and where they also have some water problems now currently, I think, with that street. But that was just a big wide open field, and we played football, pickup football, and stuff like that there. So we always would call one another. Oh, everybody had each other's phone number memorized. It was back in the day of home phones only. There were no cell phones. So Stuart's number was 2733, and my phone number was 2387. Yeah. And you did have to dial 876, I think, but you didn't have to dial 407. So yeah, anyway. But and yeah, I still have everybody's numbers that I called in my head, which is crazy. But
Um, I'm Stuart Marshall, born in 1962 here in Windermere, um, and grew up with Frank and many others that we had many adventures around town. But some of the things I remember most is we Frank and I were talking about earlier about losing how many dogs we lost to the trains that went through town because they always chased the train. So I think each one of us and we lost a dog somewhere around. That was kind of sad, but that was it ran right down the middle of town and there was no fences or anything. So minimal traffic. When I was real young, I remember being there was one police car, that was Officer Knight, and he patrolled around, but he worked part-time. And I remember he had a phone in his car that we thought was like, space age, but I think it only called like the Winter Garden Police or something, it was a radio that looked like a phone or something. But we that was fortunate because my mother had the little finders keepers shop here in Windermere right in front of the town hall, and it so spent a lot of time downtown. We played basketball at the court that was where the parking lot is for the library now, and the baseball field was where the library is, so that's where we all played little league. And but there was an asphalt basketball court right on this corner here across from the town building, and I still have scars from that because that was like falling on just gravel. It was pretty rough. And then they eventually put tennis courts there, moved the basketball court over behind my mom's shop, and then once I built the library for in Frank's grandfather's name, they turned that into a parking lot. So we ended up playing on the court behind finders keepers. But I had two older brothers that were quite a bit older than me, and so they always were they had there was another group of guys that could drive and stuff that we were always subject to. So that was it was just it was a great town to grow up in. We had places where we would hide bikes and in the bushes, and then you could take a boat and then grab a bike and ride, where you needed to go. And we had a lot of ways to get around. And as we got older and we could drive boats and all that, we try to, whip each other on inner tubes into the weeds. And, it was pretty cutthroat out there on the lake, but it was a lot less traffic then, a lot more shorefront too. So, but I'm gonna leave it at that for now. I got something. I need something to spark.
Um, well, we could start with school because that's where you guys is. So you had mentioned, Frank, that school is one way. Then all the Californians came over from Disney. So I don't know if there's something there that you can kind of say before and after and what that change was, where you were. I would assume you're sitting probably where you went to school right now.
Well, no, we actually were the very first class in the
new school.
Okay.
We actually,
I have two brothers that went.
Okay.
we had an orientation here in this,
Yeah.
not in this building, but in this location. And then, which was, I think, the year before.
Right.
First
Okay.
grade.
So we both, Stuart and a bunch of Windermere kids went to, there wasn't kindergarten back then. It went from first grade through to sixth grade. That was elementary school, first through sixth. And so Windermere Union Church had a preschool. So most of the kids that lived in Windermere went to the Windermere Union Church preschool for like a nursery school year and a kindergarten school year. So we walked from the old Windermere Union, the Windermere Union Church property. The church is still there, by the Baptist church now, I believe, or at least rented, I think. But we walked from there over here because I remember doing it. It was a big deal. So anyway, and one of my neighbors was in school here. I got to see him and Jim Winters, but he's passed away. But anyway, then the school year started, and we started at the new school. So that's the way I remember it. Anyway.
Yeah, it was 68, I think, was when it was built. So
Okay.
But
so you might remember. I mean, I just remember. It seemed like all the guys that came in from California were bigger, faster, cooler. All the girls thought they were cooler. So it's like that's the part I remember about the California influx. But and then they were probably ahead of us as far as education as well. They had the California Achievement Test back then, probably, or just starting it and stuff like that. So they were actually starting to measure
Yeah.
you know, that education. It's just-
So do you have anything?
Yeah, so I was gonna say when I got into sixth grade and the big thing was, to be a patrol and to be able, and then the best gig for being a patrol was to go to the bridge that went over the canal up the street here, because you got to leave the school early and ride your bike down to the bridge, and then you would be stationed on the bridge and then you could go, and that was halfway home for me, so I could just head home from there. And so that was, but all the kids, that's how they would cross over the canal to get in the downtown area. And it was always, I remember Mr. Clark was the principal at the time, and he had a little MG midget, and he would park it like halfway in between, and he'd always be checking to make sure you weren't stopping anywhere. And he was sneaky, he would hang out, he'd wait for people to, be cutting up on the way home, and he'd just come out of the bushes or something. So it was pretty, but I got to know Mr. Clark fairly well over the years. And that was, just growing up, and but it was, and then once we started going to, middle school, which was at the time, my first years in high school was 7th through 12th grade at Lakeview, and we rode the bus, and so it was, that was a whole different deal. But yeah, there was plenty of times, plenty of stories about the trip between the school and the bridge on patrol days. But we even had a little fort beside the bridge down on the edge of the canal that had, like, you could be under the bridge, and there was a little place where the concrete block was out, and there was a little place to put things in, and we had it was like a little club place where we could congregate on the weekends and stuff, and we'd come up by boat or whatever as well. So it was just one of those things.
I remember Mr. Clark, it was always a race. That was the thing. As soon as the bell went, we were out the door on our bikes, and it was the first person to the bridge kind of thing. That's what I'm kind of remembering. So you hit straight out of the driveway of the old driveway of the school, I think, and then you go straight across where Wasion Drive is, or whatever that road is. I know it's called Wasion something, but, and then once we hit the curve onto Lake Butler, most people were turning left, and you'd swing way out and potentially could get hit by oncoming traffic. So that's why, or by traffic that you weren't looking for. So that's, Mr. Clark would station himself there a lot to slow you down, and that, so you wouldn't take that curve so wide. But anyway, and then after that it was a free for all, but to the bridge at least. And then it seemed like the bridge was the end point for some reason. But anyway, and then how fast you can get home, get your work done, and meet at Hart's Field was the big deal. So anyway.
And the story from later on in life, after I started driving, I remember because the police in the area were always, that's, the police department's obviously grown with the population and all, but back then we knew everybody, and so there was one police officer by the name of Dick Lockman, and he was he was a good guy, but he was kind of gung-ho for a Windermere kind of atmosphere. But anyway, we had one time I was going through town, and apparently I was going a little too fast or something, and so I get pulled over right in front of, like, where Tim's Wine is now, which was the Ready Market back then. And I pull over on the side of the road right in the middle of town. And matter of fact, the train was there because the train was coming through, and the guy stopped to go to the Ready Market to get something. And he goes, and he's on his PA, he's like, please step out of the vehicle. And then as I started stepping out, he goes, "Oh, Marshall, it's you." I mean, over the loudspeaker right in the middle of town. I was like, he's like, "Better slow down." And then that was it, So but it was there was a lot of encounters. We had one time we were known. My mom was kind of Dr. Doolittle of the neighborhood, so um, she would, people would bring pets. I remember birds that fell out of the tree, squirrels that, they found a nest. And then she would always go because she would get stuff for her village exchange store here. She would go with this group of ladies every Monday over to Webster to the flea market. And there was a guy there selling rabbits with recipes around their neck. And she thought that was horrible. So she would buy a rabbit every time she go there, she'd bring a rabbit back. So we had this rabbit that was named Bonsai Bunny because he was white and he was very, but he lived in the house. He's just like a cat kind of. And one day one of our dogs was in heat, and so Dick Lockman was there, Officer Lockman was there in our driveway, and he was like, we need to keep the dogs back and all that. Well, the bunny came popping up the driveway, and he's like, he's like, look, put back by that, and the bunny just kept popping right up to him. And he literally put his hand on his gun and started backing up, and it was hilarious. But we were all like, it was just one of those moments where you're like, wait, that's cool. It's just a bunny, But yeah, there were some characters in the police department. They were all good people. They just in that days, it just everybody knew each other. It was like you knew the cars, you knew the people, and so it was kind of funny about that. But yeah.
So this is Frank again, but where the Baptist church is now, there was orange grove, and it was full of weeds that were up above our heads. Usually, a lot of times it was rarely mowed, and we would just thinking about the police and some interaction with them. And we thought it was fun, us boys. We had trails all through the weeds in there and kind of forts in there as well. And to throw peg cars, we called it, I think, or at least maybe there was another term.
Green oranges.
Yeah,
and that was that's where I was checking on the statute of limitations. So.
We would pick oranges off the trees or pick up rotten ones sometimes or whatever and throw them out over Main Street. And you had to time it just right to try to hit the windshields. And then, and we also, I like to say that it started because we were throwing oranges at other citrus trucks that were carrying oranges. And then it evolved from there because we were trying to knock oranges off the back of the trucks. But because we had a lot during the season, the harvest, there were oranges coming through town, going to Winter Garden to the juice plant from Isleworth, so and other areas around, other groves around on the south side of town. So, but we were pegging cars with. It ended up we started throwing them at cars, and sometimes we got chased through the groves by, young male teen drivers or whatever whose car we trashed, and it got a little crazy sometimes, and the police would get called, and then they would show up, and we would just disperse through the weeds and get out to our houses, and then like the next morning, I remember one time one of the I can't remember if it was Ellsworth then or who was Dick's boss, I don't remember, but anyway, one of the chiefs knocked on our door, and I am thinking, oh my gosh, this is it. Actually, we did get stopped one time. One time I ran right out of the weeds to the cop car. I mean, it was like right there. I was dead, couldn't go anywhere. And he got my name. And then the next day they show up and they knock on our door, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, he's going to tell my dad. And he knew I was there, but he talked to my dad about something totally different. So I don't know if that was his plan to try to ice me a little bit. And
I wasn't involved in any of that.
Yeah. So, who are some of the kids that maybe we should, like Tim Carr,
Tim Carr,
Mark Carter,
Tom Buzel.
Yeah,
there was a bunch of people.
Greg Smith,
all those
anyway.
guys. But we had we really, it was a great place to grow up. No doubt. We had we had the lakes, we had the, small town. We didn't have, the traffic. We had, everybody knew each other. It'd be like, even back then you could go out and, halftime would be Stuart, and you go, oh, I gotta go. But yeah, there was a group of guys that I grew up with, and my mom would she was Frank brought this up this morning, but she would when I'd have a birthday party, she'd invite them all over, but she was really crafty, so she would make bathing suits for everybody out of funky materials that she had, just wild colors, thought, and that would be like the party favorite for everybody. And then we had a collie that we lived on Lake Wasion, and they would and his name was General, and you could go up to the top of the yard and go, General can't catch me, and we'd run, and the dog would chase you all the way down to the lake, but he wouldn't go in the water, so he'd just chase you all the way to the lake, and that's what we'd do all afternoon is run until the dog just said, no, I ain't doing it anymore, but we would we would go in canoes, we'd go out on the lakes, get to people's houses that way sometimes, and uh, it was awesome place to grow up. We had a few encounters with, alligators and snakes and stuff, but we learned about that early on. And
We would travel sometimes along the lake shore instead of along, well, a lot of the time because it was the shortest distance. So if you were going between houses, or like I grew up three
doors down.
3 doors away from Stewart. So we just cut across the backyards of our neighbors to get back and forth sometimes rather than go out to the street and walk. It was just shorter and easier. So that's just what everybody did. And everybody,
not many fences back then.
no leash laws for the dogs. The dogs would follow you around towns. My dog was always with me on my bike or wherever I left. And then we'd go to the Ready Market, which is where Tim's Wine is now. It's not where people remember the Ready Market recently. It's where Dixie Cream is. That was the second Ready Market. Well, same guy, but second location. So my dad would get home for dinner and my dog wouldn't be home and I'd be home and or our dog, and he'd be like, where'd you last see the dog? Like, I don't know. And usually it was at the Ready Market because there were so many kids going in and out of the Ready Market at that point when we were up there that the dog just missed me leaving and still thought I was inside the Ready Market. She'd be sitting outside the door of the Ready Market waiting for me to come out, even though it was locked up and closed. So anyway, and then the other nice thing is we had the church bell would ring at 6 o'clock every night. And that was like,
that's right.
You could be almost anywhere in town. And by the time it finished ringing, you could be at your house from most places that we would be at. So
I do remember before
I always had to be home for dinner, which usually happened around 6 at our house. So anyway.
I do remember that before the Ready Market there was believe it or not, a 2-pump gas station and there was two mechanic bays and then a little office there. That was what that building was originally, and the other building wasn't there, the one that's Dixie Cream now, I guess. So, and it was and then they built that to match later, but that was I barely remember that. That was way back. But I can remember my brother driving up there and filling up with gas. And then we had where the big building across the street here is, there was the Paramours. That was the 2-bay gas station on the corner, screen door, snap, shut. And one of my good buddies, Mike Trewick, his aunt was Mrs. Paramore. Eunice Paramore, and they lived upstairs, I think, and of the building. And you'd go in there, and they would, they had all the candy and ice, ice cream bars and stuff like that. So we always would go over there from the basketball court, because Mike was her aunt. She was always pretty generous with us when we go in. And then I found out that when you go over to Mike's house, they got all the extra stuff that they didn't use at the store. So his mom had a good stash of a variety of candy. So, Mike's house was a pretty popular place to stop back in the day. But yeah, those were fun times.
Yeah, that was So there's a lot of stories about the Paramores. One was that Mr. Paramore wouldn't, if a hippie drove into town or was passing through, he wouldn't pump gas for him. That was back when people would pump your gas, and he wouldn't pump your gas for him until they went next door to get a haircut because there was a barber
There's a
right
barber shop.
or they could keep going, but he wasn't going to pump gas for him. So anyway,
That's right.
the hair was too long. And that was back in the 60s when the hippies were there was a house, remember the hippie house on Second
Oh, yeah.
Avenue? So
Yeah,
we had a hippie place called the Hippie House. I don't even know who
I
lived
think
here.
there's a bunch of people, a bunch of young,
Oh, yeah.
adults living there, and they had, peace signs and stuff on the front of the house. It was one of the older houses on Second Avenue.
Yeah,
Yeah, they were.
it's
Yeah.
quite a cross section of culture here.
Yeah, people have mentioned the hippie house a few times. Just wonder if there's any pictures of it anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is it in the
Got
Carl
it.
Patterson book? Do you know, or
It
I don't
might
know.
be.
I'll have to look.
I have to thumb through it because it is Second Avenue, right?
Yeah.
Yep. There was
Yeah,
two
right.
houses.
Wasion
there.
or Butler side?
On the Wasion
Okay.
side, but it's not that far down yet. It's between
So okay, so
it's
before
Pine. It's
Gotcha.
right at it's right on the corner of what's the street before Pine. I don't know.
right, but it's been torn down since. And
Yeah, it's a big, nice house. It was the guy died of an aneurysm, but
This is it's like a more contemporary house there now.
the
Okay,
guy that
Yeah.
built it was an architect.
Gotcha.
He was very contemporary,
Right.
and his wife lived there for several years
Okay.
after he died. And it seems like he was on the council or mayor or something, but I think it was council because I don't see his picture. But I can't think of his name. He's from Crossett, Arkansas, because my mom's from Crossett, and how two people from Crossett ended up in Windermere. but anyway.
So the Isleworth Grove and the Chase Grove is still operational, when you guys were
Oh,
kids
yeah.
and everything.
Yeah.
So you guys have any stories about that, or
So Stuart and I used to, well, I wasn't allowed to really work in the Grove until I was 16 because of my grandparents are great ancestors. My great grandfather had already passed away, but Stuart and I worked together one summer, and at least one, maybe
Yeah.
two, but when we could drive. And but I did go sweep the packing house floor and stuff like that. I get paid a quarter or something. I was not really doing a whole lot, but I could do that when my dad was working, and I could be down there doing something. So I would sweep the floors in the packing house as a young kid, like early elementary years.
Well, they had like a little town down there. I mean, they're the what would probably be migrant workers and other groves had a great place. They had a little store, a little church. They had lakefront, it was on Lake Bessie and all, and but we went to school with them. Some I still keep up with, like Angela Matthews, who I mean, through Facebook or whatever, occasionally I see stuff, but we went to school from first grade through high school because they lived and grew up in the Isleworth and the Groves, and quite a contrast now, but at any rate, it's I mean, it was the train used to run right straight down right into there, go through there to Dr. Phillips, and then come back out with all the oranges. We would go out, and when Frank and I worked together, we would work at night because a lot of times because it was hot and they were fertilizing and stuff, and but we used to give the guys that the regular guys that worked there, we'd give them a ride out in the groves to wherever they were working and do stuff like that. So but Frank's grandmother lived and grandfather lived there on the property, and Mrs. Chase would always say that she just had the squirrels were terrible there. There were so many of them. There were all these oak trees around. So she would offer us, I don't know how else to go over, but she would offer us $1 a squirrel to get. So we would go out, and I remember Jim Dorman, we would go and we would get them. And I never was big on hunting, so I kind of went along, but we would gather up some, and then she'd give us like $1 each, and then we'd take them down to the groves, and honestly, it was a delicacy to some people that lived there that they would make squirrel soup, and so we would take them down and leave them with some of the older ladies at the groves, and whatever. It was kind of wasn't it wasn't really enticing to me, but yeah, it was. They seemed to be excited about it. But anyway, that was so we would rid the groves of some of the squirrels. So but
So Jimmy Dorman lived next door to Stewart, and we had already, our family at that point had moved. I don't know if that
he
was,
moved to Second
we had
Avenue.
moved to Second Avenue by then, but originally we lived on Dirt Main between the bridge and Stewart and
The First Avenue or
Bay
North Drive, North
North
Drive,
Drive,
yeah.
yeah. And when we were young, we used, this is a story we've heard, that we would go out and pick up the newspapers in the neighborhood of our neighbors because we would see the dogs bring our paper in and they'd get treats. So I guess we thought we might get treats, but both our dogs fetched the newspaper. Our dads trained them to fetch the paper, so which is interesting.
Which is interesting because nobody has a paper
Nobody.
anymore. Yeah.
Sparks. Oh, Isleworth. So Isleworth was not like a company town in any way. It was they weren't lavish accommodations either, but a lot of people had houses in Orlando, like a lot of the African Americans. Some lived there full time, but some also had houses in Orlando and would go there for the weekend and attend church and then come back out and live on the property during the work week. So just varied, but there was a whole community there, and they had a church. We built the church for them, I think, but and it was a concrete block building, very nice building with, I think that even had some stained glass that they probably, raised money for themselves. But anyway, I've got pictures of some of that stuff, and then but a lot of them were just old shacks. So, but some were more like a barracks, like down along Lake Bessie. There were several that were concrete block and kind of like barrack buildings, but whole families were living there and enjoying life. There was a little store, you could buy sodas and I think hopefully you got Maury to come in. I don't know if CT set that up, but his uncle or somebody ran that store, so he actually worked in that store sometime when his uncle wasn't there. But well, when his uncle had to go do his uncle also did other stuff around the property of Isleworth, like a fuel truck would come in, he'd tell him what tank to put it in. I think if I'm thinking he's the right guy, but anyway, so he'd have to go do stuff like that. But he mainly hung out around the center of the business district of Isleworth, where the water tower was and the packing house and all that stuff. And then there were white families that lived out there as well, and then some of the foremen and people that ran the packing house and stuff like that lived on property as well. So we packed fruit. I just have vague memories of the packing house in operation. And then we got out of the packing business at some point and started doing juice and stuff. So I don't know when or why that happened, but economy, whatever. But anyway, the whole town, the grove around us, it was all like free reign. We could go anywhere, do anything. Nobody cared, or yeah, there might be an area you weren't gonna, a weird person lived there, so you kind of avoided that. But no, your parents weren't in fear for you. We were on our own. I mean, nobody was riding their bikes up to school and back with us like we did for our boys, because there's so much more traffic when they grew up here. But
yeah, it's funny. We rode our bike to school every single day, and we were on that. And I went later when we moved back after I was married and had children, and we lived in the manors right behind the school. I don't think they rode their bike more than 3 times because mom would just drop them off every morning on the way in, and it was so different because they didn't even have to cross the street. I mean, it was all on the same side. But anyway, that was it's just times change, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, there used to be where we're doing all the construction now, where the new building is. On the corner of the building, that was Susie Carr's Realty. was originally the Pioneer Federal Savings and Loan Building. And so I had an account there when I was, after I'd gotten out of college, I had an account there. And where there was Mrs. Fain used to be she was the manager, I think, or she was the head person there. And she would call me up and go, because I was notorious because there was no direct deposit back then or anything. So I would just take paychecks and just never deposit them. And she would call up and go, "Hey Stuart, I think you need to get some checks in the bank because you're getting close to being overdraft." And I'd be like, "Okay, okay," and I'd go like deposit 3 or 4 checks, and so it was a totally different world back then. I mean, her son was my Boy Scout. He was an Eagle Scout. He was my Boy Scout in the Boy Scout troop and all that. So he just goes back. So things were all connected.
Yeah.
Different ways. But
So before that building, though, I understand there was like a dive.
yeah, there was
that around when you guys were, or it already left?
My brothers
Yeah.
told me a lot of stories
Yeah.
about that. It was like there was like a multi-purpose building, but it was always like a dance night or something, or some kind of activity there every weekend or something. I don't remember.
Supposedly a pinball and things like that.
Yeah,
and
I think they had some. Well, it's also crazy if you think about it, where Vintage Realty is now on the corner there, Nunley's place. That was connected to the country store. So there was the country store, and then sort of all the way over from where the coffee shop is, all the way over to the end of the building was all the country store and the restaurant. And I can remember when I was a kid, we would go up, and it was like the Happy Days diner. There were just burgers and milkshakes and sodas and booths and that kind of thing. And then that kind of somehow died off at some point, and there was an Italian restaurant there for a little while. There was a pizza place there for a little while, and then there were Mrs. Cope. Remember the Copes took over the country store, and they put in an ice cream shop there once. So I worked at I'd go in there and clean sometimes, make a few bucks. Mrs. Cope told me I needed glasses one time because she said after I vacuumed there was a lot of stuff left over. That was there was a lot of things. I think there was even a Chinese restaurant there for a little bit, which is just people trying to make something stick. But
there was a place for us too that was like a meeting. Somebody tried to develop it, some parent. Do you remember that?
Yeah, but I can't remember where they had it. It was
yeah.
But there was also the post office was right there on the end of that building, right next to the 2-story brick one where that was the post office. And then it was a gift shop one time. I remember when it was a gift shop, it was like Infinite Mushroom or something in Windermere, which is and then it turned into a pharmacy. Yeah. And then but they there was some old buildings there at one point. I barely remember what it looked like, when I was really young, but it was there was always something going on up there. And the country store was it was like an Ace Hardware, but just on a real small scale. And
remember outside the country store, it was Johnny's country store.
Yeah.
And Johnny ran it when we were young, and then John Cope
took it over.
So it was always a John that owned it in our lifetime anyway. But they had a chalkboard, and they would put the lake level.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I think I don't know who checked that. I don't know who changed it. I think the lake levels might have been down at the bridge, but I'm not sure where they got the
they had
from,
a stick in the garage.
But they had an elevation, and they mark it every day, as far as I mean. I don't know. And that's also where I had there was a birth announcement for me on that. Somebody cleared it all off and did Frank Chase born. I don't
have a picture of that.
We have somewhere I've seen it, yeah, but I've been trying to find it. I haven't seen it in a while, but anyway. So yeah, everything's all friendly. Every small town, just fun.
And
you
my
know,
mom's,
point stuff.
I would, when I was in elementary school, I would go up, because she opened that shop like when I was in 6th grade. And when I would come home or the bus would let you off, I'd ride the bus up there. And then we just kind of hang around downtown all afternoon. And her shop turned into be like a congregational center, you know, where people was like, I call it the gossip center, but you know, people would just come in there and hang out and talk and sit, and you know, she did estate sales and stuff around town, and so everybody knew her from that. And but it was like I ran into Mr. Withers out there before we came in, and he was, you know, and they spent a lot of time together too. So that was a cool it was a cool setup.
Yeah, tell me, for people who don't know the shop, so what the shop was called,
So it was
and
Finders
describe it.
Keepers, and if anybody lived around here for any length of time, they knew it. They knew my mom, I'm sure. But
From anywhere in Orange County. I mean, it's not like just this area. People would come from Orlando once a week to make their trip to Finders Keepers to get caught up and see what she had, and so it was a big deal.
it was a village exchange, so she would take, you know, any people could bring things in on consignment kind of thing. She would pick up things at sales, put them in there. When she finally closed it down and we moved it out, we found stuff that had to be there from the first day she opened it, you know, because it was really, and she would weather because you can see through the walls of the building and doesn't have any insulation. It was the original town building, and actually the front half of the building was a screen porch originally. And then, you know, they finished that off. But when you're sitting inside, you could see cracks in the wall. So in the wintertime, it was cold in there, you know, and then in the summer it was burning hot. And she was cold natured, so she liked the summer part, but in the winter, you know, she cut the days short sometimes. So but yeah, you know, it was like I always like, Mom, make sure you turn the heater off, because I was just thinking that thing would go up like a matchbox if something happened. But anyway.
And I remember going, you know, Stuart, what do you want to do today? Oh, I got to go run the store today. Mom's got to go.
Yeah, so you
Go to
go sit up
Webster.
there. Nobody wanted to talk to me.
So then I'd go hang out with him and
Yeah.
run the store.
Yeah.
But
Anyway.
That's great. I remember when I first moved here, and I always remember that yellow stoplight that was in the front
Oh, yeah,
for a
so
long time. Man.
Yeah.
I don't know
think
if it was ever for sale, or if it was just, you
I
know,
think
part of
we-
like the lure to get people in.
Yeah, something she picked up somewhere, and she used it. Yeah, that was she had all that stuff that she put out on the sidewalk and all that. So yeah, that was I remember one of the big turmoils at one point was when they were talking about the library for building the library. They were all like, how were they going to put everything? And they had talked about, well, we need to move the shop to move that building. They were going to move it to the other corner, like over here. And that was something on the docket. And, you know, no, Mom wasn't going to have that. So that became a big little short-term controversy there. But they ended up, you know, saying it was the oldest building, and that's where they put it, and that's where it should stay, you know. So, and now it's on the registry, I guess. So it's but yeah, there was always a little bit, because it was, you know, I mean, I mean, honestly, I don't think the town ever charged her more than $300 a month rent. So I don't think we want to put that out for public knowledge, probably. But it was like I called it grandmothered in, you know. She just that's probably what it started out when they opened it up.
it was like her place.
Yeah.
Forever. Remember Bob Adams ran away from home and lived under the railroad bridge for like couple days or something.
Yeah.
Everybody knew he was there. I'm sure his parents knew he was there. But
They just let him go.
Tell me about that. That's a good story.
Yeah.
we'd be riding there. I mean, it was during school.
Yeah.
We'd ride our bike to school, and there'd Bob be under the railroad bridge as we crossed over on the bike bridge.
Yeah,
As I remember.
and it's funny because his dad was a judge, and he was, you know, his mother was a school teacher, but he was I think he got in trouble for something. He decided he was gonna, and then I think everybody knew it, and they just kind of like just kept an eye on him and said, you know, we'll let him ride it out, see what it's like. But yeah, we had plenty of characters in town, that's for sure. He what was the guy that always did the yard work and stuff, and everybody in town knew him.
Mr. Long.
Mr.
was
Long,
our-
yeah.
He did our yard, and he lived, I don't know where he lived, but he did a lot on Second Avenue and around town. And he would cut one of the long palm trees, like a royal palm. He would use that to sweep our driveway. Nobody had blowers and stuff like that back then. So he swept our driveway with a big long palm prop.
I think he worked for the town for a while. Didn't he drive the tractor for the town for
He-
sweeping the seats or scraping the streets and stuff?
He was pretty country, and
Yeah,
he'd bring his family with him to work sometimes, his sons and stuff. But he actually died, I think, in Lake Wasion because a boat drifted out during a rainstorm or something. It wasn't a big deal, and nobody would worry about stuff like that because there was no boat traffic. Hardly any out of town traffic was on the lakes. It was all people you knew. Everybody knew everybody's boats, and so if your boat drifted away, somebody would pick it up and bring it back. But he thought he had to go after it, and he did not swim, and he ended up drowning going after that boat, and never, of course, got the boat or did anything good. He died swimming after it. So it's very sad.
yeah.
But
What a downer.
he felt the responsibility to go after the boat because it was
Because
somebody
he
he was working
knew
for.
everybody in town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we did have theft rings that would come in, and they would come in on a ramp somewhere, and they would come and strip your motor off your boat in the middle of the night. So when I was older, a kid, my dad had one of the fastest boats. It was a little 16-foot Boston whaler with 100 on it or something Mercury, and it was pretty fast. You could barefoot behind it and stuff like that. So anyway, the cops would always come to our door. Usually, I think that's what they came to our door about was, hey, we need to borrow the boat tomorrow night or something like that. And we hear something's going to happen or something like that. But there was some folks out of Georgia that would come down here and cut motors off the back of boats, load them in their boat, get them out overnight, and leave your boat drifting out with no motor on it.
Yeah.
So, everybody worked together, and everybody knew each other, and so cops would use your stuff. You were friends with the cops, but you still had to obey. You weren't allowed to murder anybody.
So I lived in Wasion Bay, so directly across from my house on the lake was Bumby Point, which is, at the time, the Bumbies, there was a chain link fence at the end of the property. And now there's all the other houses on there now, but there was one old house, 10 roof, 2-story screen porches that they just used occasionally. So it was always empty. And it was like, that was the challenge when we were, it'd be like when we were growing up, we going like, all right, I'll give you 50 cents if you run up there and you open the door and step inside the porch, but it was all wooded over and it was real campish, and, there were weeds on the shore. So everything was, a little adventurous. And yeah, I'm not sure I ever went up that because it was pretty spooky, but that was always there. And then Story Point out where Kelso is now, that used to be the big guy. Once everybody got old enough to be driving boats around and all, that would be, sometimes on the weekend there'd be 30 boats there, and everybody's just hanging out and swimming and skiing and stuff. And then over on Chase Road now, where Isleworth, the road used to go right along the shoreline. So they moved it in when they did the development. But so there was a place on that side of Lake Butler, on the other side of Bird Island, where that was a big congregating area for people because it was sandy beach there, no houses, so the people I work with now when they built a house there, they found so much broken glass and glass bottles and stuff in the lake that, you know, they had at the time, you could still clean things out of the lake at the time they built the house. So but they pulled a lot of glass and stuff. It's just amazing how people just, you know, they're in a pristine place and then they're just tossing stuff out. So, but that's when you used to have litter bug signs on the interstates too, you know, and apparently we were all litter bugs back then in the 70s and early 80s. So anyway, but
Now circle back around to Bird Island.
yeah.
So speaking of that, so nobody's talked about those two like locations of like Kelso and then I guess kind of where Shaq's old house was. That
Yeah,
probably would have
that was part of their
That's part of the
grove.
right.
That was part of the grove at the time.
There was the best navel tree out there.
Yeah, because the road literally the bridge is still in the same place.
They didn't realign Chase Road too much.
They did, they
Yeah.
pulled all
A
that
little
stuff,
bit.
one where the other gate is to Isleworth.
Yeah,
Is
they
all
shortened my
pulled up.
grandparents'
So
house.
right, like where it is now, like
Right.
right before you get to that back gate to Alworth, is where they straightened it out and added that property back there. But it used to go down and around like that, and
Okay,
come
yeah,
out to the
yeah,
bridge.
that part.
But yeah, no, you said something about Bird Island. Yeah, so that was always, you know, it was always a bird sanctuary. Yeah, I got the name, you know, and but yeah, we'd camp out there, and now I don't think you can even don't go on that. But it's real swampy and you know, shallow, water even back up. And there wasn't really a lot of good places to camp was there that you'd feel comfortable.
But there weren't people coming from everybody. We would have beach parties. Somebody would host a beach party every Saturday and usually every Sunday. So in the summertime anyway, and even during school, but not like winters, it kind of got cut off. But we would go to somebody's house every Saturday or Sunday, somewhere around Lake Wasion or around Lake Butler. Typically, those were really the only populated Lake Down, maybe every now and then, but none of the other lakes were well populated. They were all surrounded by orange groves. So until you got over to Bay Hill, um, and it was just usually the same crowd, just all getting together and skiing and
hanging
parents were
out.
drinking beers and sometimes kids were drinking beers.
This one we're much older.
Right. And the other thing I wanted to mention was the regattas, and that was the old war vets. I don't know who started it or when, but we had these sailfish regattas, just little small I don't know what that sailboat's called, but it's a sunfish, a sailfish. So the little flat bottom sailboats, and so people would race. We'd have a race once a year, and they had a big cup, and you win the cup for the year, but we only raced. It was just sailfish. It wasn't like Kobe's or anything fancier than a sailfish. And the old codgers that were retired Navy and stuff had their pontoon boats. Dr. Ruling was one. I don't know if he was retired with military, but there were other retired military out there, and they'd make a big deal, and their pontoon boats would be anchored at certain locations, and that would be the course. And then my dad, I remember him waxing the sailboat on the bottom of the sailboat.
It's the best.
Yeah, everybody would
yeah.
be working on their sailboats and trying to tweak them to do a little better. And then it was a big deal. And the cup was massive. I'm sure it was fake, but it was, yeah, I don't know where the cup I wonder where it went, if it's around. Could be.
That'd be some nostalgia.
But it was really, you couldn't do it now because there's so much traffic out. It was right on Lake Butler, and everybody was there to either watch the race or be in the race, and people would have their boats out there. There'd be a party along the shore of Lake Butler, or maybe two, and everybody would be able to see it from shore, or else see it from like the end of Second Avenue or around on Lake Butler Boulevard. And then yeah, that was a fun memory. And it's amazing that's not talked about more, because it was fun for me. Anyway, as a kid, I just thought it was cool.
But you had to go way back to, that's a lot of
Yeah.
people wouldn't even,
Yeah.
wouldn't remember unless they
And what else?
It hasn't been brought up to date, so that's interesting. So how long did it go?
I don't know. I don't remember if 5 years, maybe 6 at least. I don't know when it started.
I mean, I haven't seen it in years, but you know, over the years when you've been in real estate, you sometimes see an old one like in somebody's backyard. So,
Yeah.
you know, if it was at a house,
Oh, yeah,
somebody
they're-
had been here forever, it'd be all green and everything,
Right,
yeah.
whatnot. But just assume that didn't
Yeah.
realize it was racist.
Did you learn to swim there? Did you?
I mean, I lived in swim in my backyard.
Yeah, well, I did too. But then they had swimming lessons where you could like maybe YMCA says.
Yeah,
You
no,
had different
there was like
levels.
day camp or something. They used
Yeah.
a park down there where on
And
Betsy.
Story Point was another place at the Y. They'd pick us up on a Blue Goose or something like that. There was a old Grove bus that I think R.D. Keene would lend to the Y to take us to around the Story Point or something.
Yeah.
Because actually that was, I don't know who owned the Story Point at that point, but might have been part of the Keene family. But anyway, yeah.
No, it was it was geez, there's
Oh, Stuart's mom was also my Cub Scout mistress or
yeah,
master or
yeah.
whatever. And then my dad ended up being the Boy Scout,
Troop leader.
yeah, for several
Yeah,
years. And my dad also was famous for calling himself the meanest dad in Windermere. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah, I remember I had to deal with them all the time.
Yeah. So
He was very stern. He wasn't mean. He was
yeah,
stern.
just, yeah.
I think it was, no, I got to
He
know
went-
him as I got older, and you know, and I was like, you were just joking all that time.
Well, he wasn't afraid to use the belt.
Yeah, I think that just comes with territory with
Yeah.
somebody, you know, from the agricultural industry or something like that. All the
Yeah.
people I grew up that did cattle and things like that, they were very serious.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when it
But-
came to work.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
The library Dropbox, remember Greg Smith climbing through.
yeah,
I don't know how much time we got.
yeah. No,
So
it
the
was-
old library had just a wooden flapper door on it. It didn't have any protector to keep you from reaching in or anything. And the books would drop so far down you couldn't reach them anyway unless it piled up over the weekend or something. But Mrs. Raboy ran the library. She also was a teacher.
a substitute
A
teacher.
substitute teacher. Okay. Well, she was a sixth grade teacher.
Well, she may have been permanent.
She was the paddle lady for a while, I think.
Well, that was Miss Hyman.
Oh, Mrs. Hyman. Yeah, of course. That's the name, right?
Yeah, it was. She was. Yeah, but
Um,
Frank bailed out though. He went to Lake Highland after her sixth grade.
actually, fifth grade.
Fifth
so I
grade.
didn't make
And then
patrol.
he went to boarding school, so he was like, you know, there was a gap in there where,
Then I'd come home.
yeah, you were home every summer, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And working in the Grove, that's another thing. Back what we did that one summer, maybe two, was the spray oil and some diesel fuel got mixed together. So there's oil that helps the
Fertilizer
chemical that
stick.
you're spraying stick to the leaves, so it holds it, just like people do with gardening today with horticultural oil, stuff like that. And a guy mixed diesel fuel in with the spray oil tank. And so it would start, if it was applied at a certain temperature, it would burn the leaves. So we had to work at night. That's why we were working at night. And so, well, we originally started trying to work during the day, and then they'd come out and shut us down every time it got over 85 degrees. So, which was fast in the summertime. And so Stuart and I worked at night, and we sprayed groves here and up in Sanford. We sprayed every property I think we owned at the time that summer, that one summer.
Yeah, I'd run the tank truck and he'd run the sprayer, and we would do, and then once we leave, we quit at like 6 a.m. Then we go to the lake, swim, and then go to bed and go to sleep and go and do it again, just for the summer though.
Yeah, so we worked our tails off, but it was back pre-OSHA for agriculture anyway, and there was no protection, I wasn't wearing a suit or anything. I was just in
Yeah.
work clothes, and
Yeah, those are the
spray
days.
would wrap around.
We're still
the
here at least.
Tractor cab and blow back in your face sometimes.
And all you wore was that
I put
bandana
my
across your face.
bandana up. It was crazy, and then you doze off sometimes while you're going down. That's why they tried to put me in an air conditioned cab, but I could not stay awake. So I run up under trees and stuff. So I ended up staying in the open cab so I could, because you're just creeping along at like 1 or 2 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And then Stuart would be on the water truck that he'd have to dump all the spray mix in. That's when
Yeah.
he'd mask up and put rubber gloves on when he made the mix. But
There was something that we put in the mix. It was a 500-gallon tank on the water truck, and there was something that we put in it, and it only covered that just an inch and a half of a 5-gallon bucket in 500 gallons. So I'm thinking, when I was doing it, I'm thinking, I don't think I want to touch that stuff. And he goes, it's got to be pretty potent, you know. But we didn't get any kind of back then, any hazmat information or anything. So it was
yeah.
but we were fairly safe about it. We'll see.
Stuart we would race through that grove with the 500 gallons of water on the back and slide around corners.
Yeah, that truck was fun to drive.
Yeah, we were nuts.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It was like I said, fun place to grow up.
party lines. You had a party line, right?
Yeah,
I think we were on
Back when you had to call,
Dirt Man. We
you
had
could
party
add people
lines.
on your calls when
You
that
would-
happened. That was a
to
big
pick up
deal.
the phone, make sure the line was clear before you could.
And you had to do it because it wasn't push button, so it wasn't digital. So it was a big deal. We'd get 2 or 3 people on the phone, thought we were cool. Yeah, no, we had I think when we moved from our house, I don't know what people thought when they built the new house on, because we had this one corner of the front corner of the yard where, you know, because my parents lived there since the 50s. So they had all these pets and we had all these animals, and then people would bring animals and all that. So there was like birds, squirrels, and all kinds of different animals. We had a pet monkey for a while. We had a pet skunk. We had a raccoon. We had, you know, it was crazy. We had a goat that lived in the front yard and killed our Japanese plum tree and in Windermere, you know, so you can imagine if somebody brought a goat in, left it in the front yard. And so so yeah, we had,
People have.
yeah, we had a raccoon that's famous with people that lived here at the time, because it was real friendly and would follow you around. It was mischievous and all that, but his name was Daniel Coon. So he was like, or he had a T-shirt and the whole deal. And there's probably nobody left that remembers that except me, but it was my brother. But that was he ate at a high chair and everything. You know, people probably thought we were nuts, I guess. I don't know. It was, but I was just saying there were so many different animals buried up in that corner of the yard. Whenever they dug it up, they had to go, hey, what was going on here? But
Stuart had the best tree house in his front yard
Yeah,
too.
buddy.
It was a
those
place
trees
to-
are still there too. I don't bother today. Trees are still there.
I got one question I always kind of ask that from the mid 60s to now, traffic is going to be the obvious, but you know, what has changed, if anything, you know, with Windermere?
Property value. No, I mean, it's, you know what, it considering the time and the advancements in society or whatever technology, however you want to put it, it really hasn't changed as much as, you know, it could have. And I think, you know, by it's unique in the fact that it's surrounded by the lakes. Nobody's going to build a bridge over Lake Butler. So I think it'll always stay if people just figure out that they're going to have to, it's going to take them an hour and a half to get through town at 6 o'clock and every day or 6 in the morning, you know.
That's the worst part.
But it's just I mean, yeah, it was more homey. I mean, you know, maybe these new venues that they're building will bring back some more of that, you know, because we had places to, you know, like I said, Paramore store and the country store and, you know, the Ready Market and all that stuff was, you know, it was like every day. I mean, even when my kids were growing up and I'd pick them up at the Baptist aftercare, you know, place and we'd go over and get an icy every day, and there was always 3 or 4 people, and the kids would run around and do stuff, you know, around that area you know, go over to mom's shop or whatever. But Yeah, and we were up here all the time. I mean, we lived downtown, that's all we want to do is go, all right, do my homework now? No.
We called it Uptown.
Uptown.
Yeah,
We'll meet you uptown,
meet you uptown.
4 blocks away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because even going back, people are here in the 40s and such. So there was always a meeting place. It'd be the post office, the general store. Go back maybe back to the post office, and some of that was lost when the post office was built up the road there because then everybody had mail to their door, so there was no reason to
Right. I agree.
to me.
That was a big loss.
And then, then you can argue maybe down the road, Allen's became, a little bit of a meeting place, but maybe the brewery's that. But you're right. It's kind of that's the missing piece to the neighbors just to say hi to each other on a daily or weekly basis.
I think there's some cohesiveness that's lack that was here back in those days where everybody knew. I mean, you just didn't have people interrupting you all the time. It was all you. It was Windermere and a few passers through. That was it. It wasn't like a constant stream of traffic and people coming and going, and this expansive area that now people think they live in Windermere and they don't live in Windermere, and the zip code's grown and all that stuff. So,
well, I think, I mean, this is personal probably, but I mean, of how I feel about it. But I think, the communication part, people socialize on their phones now. They don't, that was our only, it was our thing. And I think that's a not a good thing, but it's something we all live with. If any of us here left our phone somewhere, we'd be panicked all day, so it's like a love-hate relationship. But that's really what's changed so much, because I think people, things are more specific and pre-qualified rather than just, arbitrary. I was walking downtown, and, that's the other thing we should do all the time. I remember growing up, we'd go for walks almost every night, just mom, dad, whoever was my sister or my brother. We'd just walk around, and you'd end up stopping, talking to 5-10 people out, checking on, catching up. Oh, we'll stay for dinner, or whatever kind of stuff. It was a lot. That's a lot different. I think that's just societal now.
Yeah, you pull in your garage and drop the garage door. You're in your house, and then you leave the next morning, open the garage door, and go to work, and don't even know who your neighbors are. In some areas, I don't think it definitely hadn't gotten to that, at least on our quad. We're pretty good down there. So
yeah. Now I moved into Reserve of Belmere, so it's a lot like what you said.
Yeah.
But it's a different, it's a little different than here, obviously. But yeah, I have no complaints. I was blessed to be able to grow up here
and raise our kids here.
Yeah, no doubt.
This recording is Maury Tillman, recording for the Windermere Centennial celebration in 2025.
As an adult, and you start to be like, wow, like as a kid in Islesworth, of course, everybody knows if you even look up Google Islesworth, you really only find real estate stuff related to that. You might find some things on the Chases when they acquired it, but nothing in between. But as a kid, I look back and I'm like, man, it was pretty nice, white sand, dirt roads, got baptized in the lake, Lake Bessie. The unique thing is, I keep saying unique, is I'm probably the oldest of that third generation. So a lot of my elders have passed on. So there's not maybe one or two uncles and an aunt. I have an uncle and an aunt that are still here that were a part of Islesworth. But I'm the oldest of all the rest of the descendants, which for my siblings, they were born there, but they didn't really have the experience. They were kids. They were like, they didn't even go to Head Start over at the church over across the street. So none of them have a real memory of Islesworth in itself. So I'm kind of like the last of the generations of the African Americans that lived in Ellsworth all those years. All right, my name is Maury Tillman. I was born in Windermere, Florida. Actually, the hospital was actually in Winter Garden. However, we lived in Windermere, more specifically Ellsworth. I was born in 1966, and here is my remembrance of that time. My family, the Tillman family, migrated to Ellsworth in 1932. My grandfather was 15 years old. Since that time, we've had two generations of Tillmans, or three generations of Tillmans that were born and raised and died in Ellsworth at Windermere. And I have lots of fond memories. As a kid, I remember hunting throughout the orange groves. I remember the smell of the orange blossoms every year, because Ellsworth was primarily in orange groves, and our family lived in the midst of that. So the orange blossoms during the season was always very present. All of my family worked within the citrus industry with the Chase family in some capacity at that time. My grandfather was a mechanic, yeah, for the all the trucks and different machinery for the orange groves. I had a great uncle that was a foreman that would drive the crews to the orange groves. A couple of different uncles and my father were truck drivers that would drive the citrus to the different locations for it to be processed. My grandmother was actually a maid to the Chase family that owned all of the property in Ellsworth and other areas as far as the groves were concerned. I went to Head Start at the Windermere, I don't remember the exact name, but the Windermere Baptist Church as a kid. I have fond memories of being there and learning a lot and playing with all the kids. When I look back, and then, well, after leaving Head Start, then I went to Windermere Elementary, where my aunts and uncles had preceded me in going to Windermere Elementary. But by the time I got there, they had all moved on to junior high school. And I remember that there was only two Black kids in the school, myself and the janitor's kid. And I just happened, and she was a girl, and I just happened to have a crush on her. Never talked to her. I just see her from afar and would just think I really liked her. And my memories of Windermere Elementary was fun. I participated in all of the sporting events, and there's some relevance to that I'll share later. Just from a racial standpoint, being that we were a small community of Black or African Americans amongst a community that was known for being affluent, I never really felt any racism or any negative, like you don't belong here type feeling. It was unique because our family was nestled, I would say nestled in Ellsworth. We were kind of isolated from the general population of other African Americans that lived in Orlando. We were isolated. However, we had church that was there in Ellsworth Missionary Baptist Church, where I attended, sang in the choir. Obviously all of my relatives was involved in the church in some capacity. My great uncle, I had another great uncle who ran a little country store in which all the migrant workers would come and purchase what little things they need. And he would allow me to work the cash register and taught me a lot about how to count money, which was a very fun experience. Growing up in Windermere and Ellsworth as a whole, and looking back, it was a great experience. It was just a great experience as a kid. I also remember going out into the groves with my great uncle, who was a foreman, and he would have myself and my cousin and my uncle, who was close to my age. We'd all be on take us out to the grove. He'd put us on a tree, and we'd be on that tree all day long, taking fruit off and putting them in the big bins. And where the real migrant workers had maybe did hundreds of trees, but in a day. But it was great. It was a great experience as a kid, just experiencing that. It taught me how to have a strong work ethic and not be afraid of hard work, and a great appreciation for those that were doing it for a living. And that's in looking back on it. Lots of the just the overall atmosphere in Ellsworth was, I think of the white sand as a kid, just walking up and down the dirt roads, white sand, fishing in Lake Bessie with just a string around my finger, could see the bottom of the water and catching little fish. Jumping off of the docks and into the lakes. Again, in looking back, I think we were crazy because there were gators in that lake, and fortunately, no one met their demise that I'm aware of. But looking back, I would say I would never do that. But as an adult or as a child, I wouldn't jump in a lake. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun. At the time when I was coming up in Ellsworth, it was operational, but I don't think it was at the peak. I think it was probably toward the tail end of its production. It had a packing house that I never really saw many cars there. A train used to come and I guess pick up fruit because I think it would end at the packing house. Didn't see many migrant workers that lived there. However, I did see some of the housing, I guess you would call it, that was meant for the migrant workers. But I never saw them, bring in a migrant workers and they stay in what they call the camp. I just saw the buildings for it, but it was still in production. Like I mentioned, my great uncle had a little country store that he served everything from soft drinks to cookies, chips, snacks, just mainly for the migrant workers before they went out into the crew. I mean, they'd come in by a bus and then they would go to the store, load back up, and then go out into the groves. Also as a child, when I was in elementary, I was asked if I wanted to try out for baseball. And I actually tried out and I made the team. It was, we were the A's. I don't remember. I just remember the uniform, yellow and white, and fond memories of the Ready Market that was here in Windermere and getting slushies. That was a fond memory. I still remember our P.O. box that was at the post office there. It was P.O. Box 19. I don't know why that always stayed in my mind, but it was always there. But when I remember making a team and then before the first game, I got drafted to another team. I didn't even know what that meant. I just knew I was going to another team. And it just so happened that particular team, we made it to the championship game. I wasn't a star player by no means, but because it was my first time playing organized baseball. Um, but it was just fun knowing that we made first place and being a part of that. Uh, I had mentioned earlier about my experience at Windermere Elementary and, being always picked first when it came to some sporting kickball, relays, and I was always picked first, and I would always do well. And when we moved from Windermere, we moved to Pine Hills, and uh, Pine Hills is much more integrated. So the school I went to had, a lot more Black kids than what I was used to. So I went from being picked first to not being picked at all because I was just one of many. Um, so it was kind of a disappointment, but like again, and looking back, I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm not unique anymore. Kids being kids. One of the things that stands out in a major way in us being mischievous was, as I mentioned earlier, uh, Ellsworth in itself, as far as the production of the oranges to pay, it seemed like the packing house wasn't really used as much. So it was empty a lot of the times. So we as kids would sneak into the packing house and slide down the chutes and just having fun and just roaming around. It's empty and knowing that we shouldn't be there. And we had done this, a bunch of times. But this one particular time we were in the packing house and we were sliding around and we'd ride our bicycles up there. And next thing you know, we hear this loud voice saying, "Hey, you kids, get out of there." And it was Frank Chase Sr., and he had our bicycles in his hands. And all I remember is us scurrying out of there. And I was praying that they wouldn't tell my dad. I was like, oh God, I'm going to be in trouble. I'm going to be in trouble. It never got back, at least my dad or my mom or anybody ever said anything to us. But it scared me enough to where I was like, I'm not going there again. I'm not. But I'll always remember that. I hope Frank Chase Jr., he probably doesn't recall it, but can appreciate knowing that probably his father running us out of the packing house when we were kids. Played a lot of hide and seek just because there was just so many places you could hide. The groves were our playground. It was nothing for us to go out there, whether it be hunting, climbing the trees. It was our playground, and it was a lot of fun. Remember a lot of palm trees, banana trees. It was almost felt tropic in a way. And again, you didn't appreciate those things as a kid, but looking back, you're like, man, you were in a little bit of an oasis in comparison to other parts of Orlando or even other parts of Windermere for that matter. But it complemented the town of Windermere, and it always felt like it was all inclusive, all a part of the same. Even though Ellsworth was, kind of like a peninsula. The entrance, the only entrance going into Ellsworth was from Main Street. So basically, if you took Main Street all the way to the end, now you'll hit a wall. But before, that was the entrance into Ellsworth, and where all the trucks would come through and anything else. It was kind of more like a destination. Either you lived there, worked there in some capacity, or you're transporting fruit in or out. It was always funny because at our church, whenever there'd be a visiting church, the overall message it was to any visiting church was, make sure you do the speed limit, because those police in Windermere, they'll stop you. Make sure you do the speed limit. And that was always the number one speech they would have for anybody coming through to visit us. Because again, it was a destination. It wasn't pass through. Um, and just a lot of fond memories, also sad memories of people passing away. I had a sister, a baby sister that passed away when she was 2 years old. We had her services at the Islesworth Missionary Baptist Church, and other relatives in which like again was born and you know had passed away there. Um, as I mentioned, the groves were our playground. The lake was our recreational pool or whatever that was just where we would have fun. So myself and one of the white kids, I don't remember his name. I think his first name was Alan. That we were friends and we wanted to go camping. So he came, so we decided, okay, we're going to go camping and we were going to do it in Islesworth, near where I live. And my uncle that was close to my age, his name was Ricky. Uh, we decided, okay, we're going to go camping, and it was in the evening, and we had caught some fish, and we're right by the bank, nestled in some a wooded area right next to the water. Got a little fire, called ourselves cooking the fish. It was burnt and taste burnt. Um, and one by one, Alan had to leave. He had to go home for something. My uncle, I remember my grandmother calling him out loud and he left. So I'm there and I'm like, oh, I can't stay here by myself. So I left and went home. I went back to the camp the next morning or the next day. Everything was totally destroyed. We could tell that critters of some sort had eaten the crackers. Just you saw that it was something had been there. And again, as an adult looking back, I thought, how foolish were we kids setting up camp next to the water of the lake? Nothing, no tents, no sleeping bags. We're just going to do it. How foolish were we as kids? Maybe it was God, a blessing that we all had to go home for some reason, because who knows? It could have been snakes. Gator could have came up on the bank. Who knows? But it was a fond memory, though. It was a fond memory. So the church was fully functional until they sold the property. And most of the members migrated to another church in Orlando. The church wasn't obviously, most of the members were from Windermere, from Islesworth Baptist Church. The church itself wasn't called Islesworth anymore. But if you had gone to the service, you would feel like, oh, this is the same congregation that was in Islesworth. So they kind of stayed together for the most part. At that point in time, I was probably 18. I think they sold the property in 1984. I had just graduated high school, so I really wasn't plugged into what happened to a lot of the residents that were there other than my immediate family. And although this expands a little bit outside of Windermere, but a lot of my family, when I look at where we lived, I mean, we lived in Islesworth, where now it's, probably one of the richest areas in the state. But some of us migrated over to, not myself, but some of my family migrated over to the Sand Lake area, in which was very rich property in years past. Now, they did benefit from some of the sales of when they started to develop that area. But before Dr. Phillips, he lived on that property on the other side of Orange Tree. So it's kind of a rich history of my family in Southwest Orange County. But again, most of the memories were in Ellsworth. And it was not long ago, in fact, in the past year or so, that I had learned other history as to how long we had, our family generations were there. Because as a kid, I'm not thinking about, when did my grandfather move here or even how we got there. So it was very interesting, and it's something that myself and I know my kids have great interest as to how the migration kind of took place prior to us getting to Windermere.
Do you have any expansion on that? I mean, obviously it's going to be secondhand accounts, but
The only thing I can pretty much say is a lot of the family, and I remember as a kid, the city Monticello, which was in northern Florida near Tallahassee. Um, for African Americans at that time, and I think this was post Civil War, they would migrate to certain places, and Monticello was one of those places where a lot of um, former slaves, if you want to call it that, migrated to, and then they migrated to different places. I'm curious as to how did they go from there to Ellsworth? I'm very curious as to how that migration took place. Was it an ad that said we need workers? I don't know. And how did my family, because it was only 78, it was 78 African Americans in that census. And most of the names that I would see, a lot of the names I would see, I recognized. And being, elders, obviously they were much, much older. I recognized and I was able to associate. Oh, that was Bessie. Bessie was my uncle Bud's wife. I didn't know that. I just thought that she was just Bessie. My great grandmother, Jannie Bell. I never met her husband, George Tillman, but obviously he was my great great grandfather, and I could see where he was named after his father that migrated to Ellsworth. I do have a unique story. It's kind of neutral as far as, how you would perceive it, but it kind of speaks to how isolated we were in Ellsworth. And it may even speak to the African American experience back then. So as I mentioned earlier, I went to Head Start at Windermere. I think it was Windermere Baptist Church. It was before the big church got there, right there on the corner of Main Street and across from the Ready Market. And I remember the teacher having a big world map on the wall, and she wanted all of us to go home and talk to our parents and find out where we came from on the map. I had no clue. I didn't go home and ask my parents. I just figured I'd make something up. So go back to school next day, and teachers going around the room and, say, Tommy, where well, we're from England. Oh, we're from all these different places. And when she got to me, before I could even make up where I was from, she said, "Oh, Maury, you're from Africa." And I was a little taken back. I didn't obviously argue the point. I'm just a little kid. But I felt like really sad because I was like, the only images I knew of Africa was either stuff I saw on TV, like Tarzan, or National Geographics of people with the bones in their mouths. And I'm like, that's not me. But as you grow up, you find out true history and you find out, oh, you really are from Africa. But it was an experience though that I will never ever forget, because it made me understand the importance of knowing your history. and so many, even to this day, a lot of kids, they don't know their history. They just know what's in front of them, even with the internet. I mean, nothing's really speaking to where exactly did you come from, and the significance of that, of knowing that. So that experience was one that I'd probably never forget. I don't necessarily look at it as a negative thing. I look at it as an eye-opening and awareness thing as a kid, um, and the importance of being able to see yourself through others, wherever that may be. Being able to see myself as an African American, being a president, or during that time, it was less diverse in some areas and more diverse in others. But that experience itself was humbling and eye-opening.
So did you ever find out exactly where your family came from originally, or-
Specifically in Africa, no.
But it definitely was
But
in Africa.
oh yeah, it definitely was from Africa,
Mhm.
as many African Americans that
Mhm.
migrated here, whether it was on slave ships, at some point. On my mother's side of the family, we had a historian that kind of traced it all the way back to the port that the slave ship came on, and so most of us can probably trace, if you go deep enough, it's going to come from that region of the world.
You don't have to answer this question, but you kind of said it a couple times, but not necessarily the word isolation, but how different it was in Isleworth with, specifically, with race differences and things like that compared to Orlando or even some of our surrounding municipalities and such at the time, which are now, I guess, municipalities. Is there a reason, do you think, for that, or what it just don't know. It just felt different to what maybe people you talked to in Orlando were feeling themselves.
Well, as a kid, I'll just say it was that way just geographically. This was just where the Chase Groves were. They had housing that was there for the people that worked there. We call them the quarters. It was livable. It was, I didn't feel poor. As far as general population of other African Americans, the only experience that I had with that was when we visit our grandmother in Apopka, and that was just a straight ride to up McGuire. And I'd see other African Americans, and but not until I moved from Windermere that I realized, oh, there's a whole nother population of African Americans that live here, and I go to school with these people. So it was unique in so many ways. In isolation, it's not the right term, because it was just geographically, like I said, if you went to Isleworth, it was a destination. It was not somewhere you pass through on your way to someplace else. If you went through the gates that were there, and it wasn't gates as we would imagine it now, it was just chain link fence. And I had heard at one point in time, probably well before me, that they used to lock the gates after a certain time. I don't know. Obviously, people live there. I don't know how. It's hard not to imagine it wasn't true, because the gates were there, but all the time that I lived there, I always saw the gates open. But that's what I mean. And it was a peninsula. It literally was surrounded by lakes, and it's even unique thinking about all these lakes around us, and as the Butler chain of lakes, where it's like, oh, we're going to the Butler chain. And I'm like, that's just Lake Butler. We just go fishing there. Lake Bessie is we just go fishing. We just swim and that kind of thing. It was kind of sad to hear that they sold the property because I still had a few relatives that still worked there, even though all the production and everything had stopped. I think I had another like uncle-in-law that still worked on the property, I think doing maybe maintenance of some sort until he passed away. So the other unique thing being an African American in Ellsworth, living in this geographically area where not other African Americans would come to, because unless you came to visit the church, you didn't know we existed. But if you said, I remember many times where it's like, where do you live? And you say Windermere, you'll get this, ooh, as though we were, affluent, you know. And that carried on. I mean, even to this day, if I were to say to someone, hey, where were you born? I'd be like, Ellsworth. They'd be like, ooh, and I always feel I have to tell them, no, not what it is now, and kind of go into just a small snippet of history as to, these cluster of African Americans that live there. But we always got associated with just, you said to where you lived, they automatically thought you had money. And like I said, didn't feel poor at all, but it was, I think it was traditional Southern living, remember gardens, my grandmother, vegetables, they grew the vegetables, you know, eating things that I would not dare eat now was just common. Raccoons, possums, uh, obviously fish galore, rabbits, turtles. Remember my grandmother, I remember my grandmother making turtle soup. We lived off of the land, and it was all right there in Ellsworth that we lived. Uh, it was just a unique experience for a kid, at least, from my experience, it was unique. I do have one other story about me hunting with my dad because I thought this is a good memory for me. So I was hunting with my dad, and he had hound dogs or hunting dogs that he would use to chase the raccoons or possum. They'd find them, they'd bark, bark, bark. And this particular night we're hunting, and I was with him, and he came upon a possum, and my dad goes, he sees the possum, he shoots the possum. He had a little 22 pistol or that he shot him with. We had rifles, but he used a pistol, shot the possum, and he gives the possum to me to hold while we were walking to go wherever else we were going hunting. And I just have the possum on my little finger, wrapped around, the tail wrapped around my finger, and I'm just carrying it along. No, not thinking anything of it. And we came upon someplace else where my dad spotted something. And in my curiosity, I put the possum down on the ground. And as soon as I walked away, the possum scurried off into the woods. Thus, I learned the definition of possum. When someone says playing possum, I was like, I had this possum that was alive and well, carrying it along, thought it was dead, didn't move, and it scurried off into the woods. So that was unique. I also remember, now that I think about it, around that time, Disney was just starting up, and they had the big spotlights that would be pointing up into the sky. And being where we were, and that was another beautiful thing in that being there, is once Disney was there, I remember always hearing the fireworks. But I remember looking up into the sky, and this is before I knew about spotlights or anything like that. I'd see like light going through the clouds, and I just thought they were angels. that were just floating around up there. Again, later in life, I realized, oh, those were just the spotlights from Disney that was there. Um, so that was unique in the beauty of being there. Um, Living right in front of Lake Bessie, which the lake nowadays is lakefront property. Back then, it was just a lake out back. And it was beautiful seeing the rain come across the lake before it got to you. It was just like mesmerizing to actually see it coming across the lake. And then it comes, it hits you, not understanding how weather works and that kind of thing. It was just a unique experience. Um, but Windermere, Ellsworth, it will always be close to me. Um, I'll always feel associated. I mean, I live in Winter Garden, which I pass through here all the time. Whoever I'm with, whether it's a significant other or my kids, they get tired of me saying, "Oh yeah, I went to school right over there. That was the Ready Market over there. That was the post office." They're like, "Dad, you told us that already," or "You told me that already." And I'm like, "Oh, I did? Oh, okay." But nothing but really fond memories. Like I said, as an African American, I don't have any. I don't. eh, Not that I wish I had some like, oh yeah, they wouldn't let us eat in the store. Like things you hear in the media of things of that of the past of those relations back then. Um, Never experienced that here. Not, just the only thing, and I look at it as more kid curiosity. I remember a lot of not a lot, a few white kids, they want to touch your hair. It's like, oh, let me touch your hair. And, looking back, it's like, oh, they just probably never seen a black person. And it just was like, let me touch your hair. I remember having what I call a little white girlfriend. I don't even know how we even define it because it wasn't like we hung out, maybe had passed a love note. Do you love me? Or I like you. Do you like me? Yes or no? And I remember the kids, and this was actually in Head Start that I remember this, and the kids were joking, saying, "You're going to have zebra babies. Your babies are going to be zebras." I don't know what to talk. All I imagined was a baby with black and white stripes. It's like, but beyond that, I mean, it was just it was very fond memories, and unique to the African American experience because we didn't see anybody else here in town that looked like us, so we were it. And if it would look like us, for me, it were probably a family member. So it was fun. Um, and to see the city slowly grow and still maintain some of the old they still have dirt roads, which were dirt roads back then. They're still dirt roads now. So yes, you've seen growth, but at the same time you see preservation. I was a little disappointed the post office is not there anymore and the Ready Market was not there, but for the most part everything is still the same. It still carries that same uh old feeling that we had when we were kids and used to come through. Um, is the art store art class? It was a place that used to was right across the street from here.
Yep. Still up in there, the art room
Yeah.
in the old mill, I think it was originally. I don't know what it was when you were growing up,
I
but
remember it being right behind the building across, like on the corner there. It used to be a gas station. I don't know
yeah.
what it is now. I think it's an office building of some sort.
Yeah, it's a corporate office for a developer. And then there's the Paramore House. And then the art room is in the next building a block over here.
Okay.
It's that elongated building, which I believe was a sawmill at some point.
possibly maybe before my
Because
time.
it's over in a residential area, and I think that's why they're allowed some commercial. So whether it was somewhere different than that, I don't know. I've been here since '07, and that's where it's been.
Yeah,
But it could have
probably
been.
was before that because it was right behind that office building that's on that corner there.
Okay.
But it was there for many, many years. I used to be like, wow, this is, I mean, even well into my adulthood, it was there. One other memory that I had, a very fond memory, was every Sunday when I was a kid, my dad would meet some of the other workers. I don't know who they friends of the family, black men would they would play basketball at the basketball court that was right behind City Hall. Every Sunday they would be out there and just playing. And I look back and I'm like, man, that was not your, traditional place where you would think in the middle of Windermere, here's all these African American young men out there playing basketball every Sunday, and they allowed me to come in and throw the ball up or whatever for whatever reason. But it was a fond memory of being with my dad at that time. Um, when I think about, oh, he used to take me to shoot basketball with him with all the other guys and talking crap to each other and that kind of stuff. So that was a unique experience.
That's a cool story because that even after Isleworth was gone and Shaquille O'Neal moved in subsequently into Isleworth, and he used to come and play basketball with some of the kids and whatnot on presumably the same courts.
Yeah, right. Right.
So,
Yeah. It was so I worked for Darden Restaurants and we had a African American CEO. His name's Clarence Otis. And he actually owned a home in Islesworth. And I work in IT and he needed home support. And I happened to get the call to be like, hey, Clarence needs help at his house. He's not there, but his wife is there. This was the first time that I had been in Islesworth since it is what it is today. And I was so excited, my mind was way past supporting the CEO of the company. So I went there and did what I did. And I remember getting it, trying to, well, not try, but I mentioned a couple things to his wife in regard to there being African Americans that lived there. And she was like, oh, I heard, she had heard of something, and I didn't feel it was the time for me to go into the history of Islesworth. But after I was done, I probably spent another 45 minutes to an hour just driving around the streets to see what, if anything, was resembled where, I grew up, or areas. And I recognize some oak trees that I'm like, oh, that tree is still there. Uh, but it was kind of surreal to see where it was just groves, orange trees as far as you could see, to just streets and mansions, and it was just a surreal feeling. And I even remember parking and just on the side of the road and just was reminiscing for a moment that although it's built up, all these beautiful homes, but you still had a lot of oak trees and that, obviously were there before these homes were there, that it still maintained that same beauty, just in a different way. And, but just leaving, just feeling like, man, it's just so surreal. I'd always had this dream. Oh, one day I'm going to become so rich, I'm going to move back to Ellsworth. That hasn't happened. Who knows? Maybe I hit the lotto. But if I did, I'm going to find something in there to say I'm going back home.
that's right. House on Lake Bessie.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I'll be probably one resident in there that actually was there way before all these other things happened. So very prideful to have come from Isleworth, Windermere, and to say that was my birthplace. Really, really, I'm proud of that.
I think you've kind of answered it a good job on your own, but I always kind of ask everybody of, we've started out in the 60s and here we are in 2025 doing the Centennial. You said what has changed, really. It's not much. The feeling is kind of there, but was there a point in time where you started seeing change, or is there just in that kind of general subject matter of between the 60s to now, is there anything different or you saw when that change would be? Some people have said Disney or Lockheed. A lot of people have said the same thing traffic is the biggest change, but everything else kind of feels the same.
I think I mentioned earlier the changes that they made as far as to the town, the downtown Main Street and off streets changed very little. Like I said, you still see dirt roads that were dirt roads. And if you really look, you still see some old houses that were there. Obviously there's grand homes that are built around it, but there's still remnants of the old time houses that you thought when I was a kid, I was like, oh man, that's a beautiful house. Well, now it's like, I wouldn't live there, um, the change that I pretty much saw that was outside of I guess we call it maybe South Windermere, I guess, just that whole 535, just the expansion of Windermere. And I've had some friends or colleagues that say they live in Windermere, and of course my mind automatically thinks to Isleworth, Main Street, not realizing they live in a house similar to what I live in Winter Garden. But the population growth. But so over there, I was able to see growth significantly, which again speaks to how well they preserved as much as they could the heart of Windermere. Even though the ready market is not there, but the building is still there. Even though the post office is not there, the building is still there. So somebody like myself who was born here can still see those remnants, and it's not like some shadow of a place where it's something not even resembling what was there. So it may not be good for someone riding with me, like family, for me to still point out buildings, but it does speak to whoever was doing the planning. I'm sure it had to be intentional with preserving a lot of what's in place in the midst of growth and homes being torn down and rebuilt to what they are today. So hats off to the planning and those people that's preserved this area. Even this police station, it's been here, and even though it's been rebuilt, it's not that much different than what I remember seeing when I was a kid, passing by here every day. Even me living in Winter Garden, I've been there for about 20 years. And when I moved back to this side of town in Winter Garden, 429 had just got built. It was like riding on the Autobahn for a while. You could just get on there and go. To again, with all the growth now, it's like, oh my God, it takes me 20 minutes just to get from my house to the turnpike, and to see the expansion of the roads and just all the property values. It's just for this whole Southwest area. I've been blessed to be a part of it. And I'll probably die in this area. But my fondest memory was always be as a kid growing up in Windermere in Ellsworth, because I know it's unique. It's unique to a lot of people that even though they grew up in Southwest Orange County, or it's not going to be the same as the what I experienced living on property that's surrounded by beautiful lakes, uh, white sand roads, and orange groves all around you, smelling the orange blossoms, pulling bananas off of a tree, um, having your family all around you. And you probably heard the term Big Mama, which was my great grandmother, and she was a small little frail lady, but we called her Big Mama, and she would always have treats for us whenever we would go to her house. She would have Charlie's cookies delivered to her house, and I thought it was such the biggest deal in the whole world. And I look back and I'm like, she had chocolate chip cookies delivered to her house. You know, how many people knew that Charlie's chips or Charlie's chocolate chip cookies were being delivered to people? And she would have them, and obviously she had it for all of her grandchildren. But when we would come, it'd always be a treat. And again, just fond memories of just being a kid, maybe not having much, but feeling like you had the world, or not feeling like yeah. Looking back and say you had everything. You had everything you needed. You had everything, you know. Never any hungry days. No, yeah. It's just amazing to kind of think just how my family was intertwined into, like I said, even the women that lived in Ellsworth, they were maids, I mentioned my grandmother. She was a maid for the Chase family, but she also was a maid for the Bradfords. And I don't know, I just know they lived here in Windermere. I knew where their house was, and she was their maid until she basically couldn't work anymore. And I think Mr. Bradford was a doctor. Um, Daughter, she's an attorney, and they pretty much was the overseers of her estate until she passed away. Um, and I have had colleagues that I have worked with, one in which was around my age, and she remembered she worked for a flower shop here in Windermere, and she said she remembered when she knew I was from Ellsworth. She said the only time she went there is to deliver flowers to at a funeral that was for a little girl. And I said, that little girl was my sister. Which was like, wow, what a small world. I had another colleague that her parents had a maid, and she said her name was Jana Bell, or whatever the name was. I'm like, that was my auntie, my great auntie. That was her maid. So unique experience. And even though we were not affluent by any means, we felt it, when we would drift out of Windermere, and people just think you're rich, No, we're just some little old country folk back there picking oranges, doing something with fruit, buying buying an orange. I remember seeing someone buy an orange someplace and says, who does that? Who buys oranges? Because we just had them there. You just go to the tree and pick them off, not realizing that, yeah, you can go to jail in certain cases, but now you can't even find it. But definitely fond memories.
Gary Gruen was mayor from 2004 to 2019. Formally came to live in Windermere spring, summer of 85, I believe it was. So it's a good long time ago. But ironically, I had good friends that lived in Windermere, so we always wanted to live in Windermere, but we were actually living 2 miles away. But every I don't know, at least once or twice a month, we'd come over here and stay with friends, and we'd drive through. And my wife would always say, "Someday we're going to live here." I said, "Yeah, I don't know if I can ever afford it." And then actually one year we just finally bit the bullet and said, because it was never going down, and actually jumped in and bought it. Oh, what was it like when I moved here, and even before I moved here? There used to be a gas station on the corner of 6th Avenue and Main, and people would find that, oh my God, a gas station in Windermere, but and there was virtually nothing from Park Avenue all the way to Old Winter Garden Road. It was all groves. And it wasn't until the late 80s when we got back-to-back freezes that really wiped out the citrus industry. And that's when all the development really kind of began. Hard to believe, but that's even at that period, Isleworth was just really being started taking. The only thing really out here back then was uh, what was a Bay Hill, yeah. And to come out here was kind of a haul sometimes. There was no 2-lane. I mean, it was all single lane roads. And I can also remember on that strip, which was all groves to Old Winter Garden Road, where Publix is today, was an airstrip. And it was just a dirt airstrip, grass, but a lot of ultralights and little private aircraft was there. And orange groves and an airstrip. And of course, today it's all developed. And when I came, we were looking at a number of homes. And even at that time, it was, prices were going up, up, up. And I remember we looked at one place, and it was the first day it was up for sale. And the realtor says, "Well, if you're interested, you better put it in offer, because I've already got 4 offers," and they had only had the place open for like a couple of hours. So one of the places we looked at was on the corner of 6th and Forest. And where the library is today was a Little League field. And my wife said, "Oh, I really like this house. I want to live here." And I went, no. Why? Because I don't feel like I can keep my car in the driveway, because every weekend there's going to be foul balls coming over, hitting my car in the driveway. So anyway, we moved over on Forest. Oh God, like I said, that was like late summer of '85, I think. Uh, Interesting times. I think when I think about some of we've had some tumultuous times here in town, and we also had some really challenging times. And I remember 2004, I took office in March, and not 6 months later, we got hit with back-to-back hurricanes, and like 3 weeks apart. Charlie, Francis, Jean. By the second one, all the downtown was boarded up. The very first one took out our historic building, the Cal Palmer building. And it took us, oh gosh, year and a half to get that refurbished, remodeled, however, because it had to be all done to the historic standards. And that was really, really difficult for someone to find somebody, especially after all those hurricanes and all the damage. I mean, after 3 hurricanes, the entire Central Florida was blue tarp roofs everywhere. So we got through that, Charlie, Francis, Jean, and of course we'd lose power for a week each time. And it would be like we just got the power back, and then 2 weeks later, power would be gone again. Well, it was only after the first one, I said, "That's it. I'm getting a generator." And that's still, it's difficult sometimes, because people don't realize that 80% of the people still to this day in Windermere are on wells. No electricity, no water, no water, no toilets. So we would have to fill our tubs up when the ordeal was going to come. Or if you knew somebody who had a swimming pool, fortunately for me, I lived on right by the lake. So, you could kind of, pour water in. But yeah, those were interesting times. So we get through all the hurricanes. Along comes winter time. And the next thing we did was build and start constructing the roundabouts. And oh my Lord, the people that complained the most weren't the residents. They were, of course, weren't happy because all the side residential streets had to become the new detour spots. But anybody driving through town gets endless complaints. I'm getting my car dirty. It's like, go around. I mean, I don't know what they thought, because the whole downtown was tore up, putting roundabouts in. And we had a great engineer there, and he was able to work and things around so that we could kind of speed it up as much as possible. And I think it only took about 4 to 5 months to really get it done. And of course, it's all pavers, so you knew where the time was laying all those pavers and that. But anyway, that was a very, very interesting year from 2004 to 2005. And, we've had our fair share of trials and tribulations, but, the town has survived through all these years. And it's kind of interesting to see it finally become 100. Because actually, from a historical perspective, this town has been here, oh gosh, since the late 1800s. It was founded by 3 individuals from Ohio, Wauseon, Ohio, hence Wauseon Bay. And they actually thought it looked at, they were, some of the guys, some of them were English in the very first times of being settled. And when they saw this place, as you can imagine, there was very little here because we weren't even incorporated until 1925. But in the late 1800s, there was very little here. And they thought this place reminded them of their places, the Lake District in England, hence the name Windermere. So we have a sister city in the northern part of England. And so that's hence the name of Windermere. And like I said, this town was really being constructed and built and what have you. But 1925 is when it was incorporated. And that's why it became, as a matter of the anniversary would be 1925, despite the fact that the town did exist. It's just that they didn't have a government. And so by their incorporating, that enabled them to create their own government. And you'll find that the Coe, Winter Garden, all of those cities came onto their own about that same time. I guess something had happened in the early 1900s that lent themselves to wanting to be able to be self-governing, which is to this day, I think, a great thing. The government that's the small town government that's close to the people. I mean, let's be honest. You want to try to do business or try to have a complaint with Orange County, but here in the small town of Coe, Winter Garden, Windermere, Oakland, you can go to a council meeting and be heard. Government's close to the people. So that's the one big thing I do miss is having that local government. That and the fact that, this town now has what I consider one of the best police departments around. And it's top rated for its size. I mean, let's be honest, small community and a small police force, but it's always was comforting to know. And I had to put it to a test one time. My wife fell and got hurt. How long would it take for somebody to come here? It was 2 minutes. 2 minutes after a 911 call. The police were first to arrive, and it wasn't much longer. The fire services arrived. So that's one wonderful thing I really kind of miss about the small town and having all that, because I think the service is good.
Do you have anything to expand on? So you said you came here in 85,
Yeah.
but before that you were coming here, you had friends here,
Yeah.
and you wanted to be in Windermere. So tell me, what was the attraction in the early, whether it be late 70s, early 80s, that was you made Windermere the goal?
That's ironic you would say that, because when we would come here, my wife would always say, "You make sure you stay at the speed limit." And because they were, they were well known that they would not tolerate speeders. So it was always, make sure. And my wife says, this town has that safety. If you know that they're gonna, have a police force out here, it's a safe community. And she goes, "This is where I'd want to live." I said, "Yeah, you're right." I mean, and that's kind of one of the main things was the fact that it was a safe community. It had a police department that is, well, was always patrolling and keeping the citizens safe. We liked that. We liked the lakes. Oh my goodness, when I first came here, I mean, you could drink the water in the lakes. I mean, it was just pristine. Of course, now there's been so much development all around, but yeah, it was the lakes and the safety that was the biggest thing for us. And to be honest with you, a lot of that hasn't changed. That's been what, 40 some years ago. So that was our draw. Plus, we always thought, I my son went to West Orange High, and just to tell you how long ago, when we came here, there was no Dr. Phillips High, there was no Olympia High, there just was nothing out here. There was no need. Of course, over the years now, you've got all these high schools and the schools and expansion, and to put things in perspective, 3,000 people, a little over 3,000 people live in Windermere. I haven't kept up with it lately, but I'm sure 40,000 people have a Windermere address, and that just lends itself to so much confusion. One of the things that I think, and I fought against it, because one of the most confusing things is, and you don't have to go on, but anywhere but social media, to have people who have the complaint about Windermere High School and what is wrong with the Windermere police. Why aren't they doing that? Windermere High School is not in Windermere. And when I talk about the roundabouts, boy, there was a lot of skepticism, and I have to tell you, I was a little apprehensive. I mean, it was a big chunk of money for us to pay. We got some grants, but I was not sure if the roundabouts would work. Lo and behold, within 6 months, 8 months, traffic was flowing. It was wonderful. And back then, we only had, maybe there was no Horizon West. They had actually shut down Chase Road for a while to redo it. And there was, not that much upheaval because there wasn't that much traffic. So the roundabouts worked wonderful. If you're only dealing with 6,000 cars a day, they work fine. Unfortunately, now we're dealing with 35, 40,000 cars a day. And you can pretty much sum them up that it starts around 2 o'clock and goes until 7:30, 8 o'clock. And, all the roundabouts in the world aren't going to help you when you're trying to put that much, you're trying to put a gallon through a funnel. That's basically it. So anyway, I think that's good. I know too, some of the things that I was working on that I was working on for a while, and we're finally getting the grants, and that was to give people the option to have water. So I think that's, you heard me talk about what it's like without city water if you're on a well, because again, if you lose electricity, you have no water, but at least you would have water. And so that's one of the good things. And of course, that's good too for the lakes, to have the water. I can't think of much anything else, but Windermere's always been very pro supporting and very conservative when it comes to the lakes and making sure we maintain the water quality. Because quite frankly, that's one of the biggest draws to Windermere is the Butler chain of lakes. And so there's always been individuals just really to be guardians of the quality of the Butler chain of lakes. And that's a big, big plus too, I think. So I always kind of laugh because, people who don't know me or are my neighbors and find out that, I was the mayor of Windermere, they go, whoa, Windermere has really grown, hasn't it? No, it hasn't. I said, it's only 3,000 people. Windermere hasn't grown. It's what the county has done all around us. The influx of the housing and the retail and everything they've done around us. I can remember, well, to come to Windermere was kind of like, in the boondocks. They'd say, wow, yeah, you're way out there. I thought Bay Hill was out there, but wow, you guys are even further out there. Yeah, yeah. But I think that too was a draw too, because I mean, I can tell you how many Disney original Disney people came here, like 5, 6 of them that were the original guys that came from California to start the Magic Kingdom. And, and the funny part about it is they came and they never left. They never left. Many of them are retired, but they stayed here, So even the former president of the whole resort area out there, he who just passed away recently, he came and he stayed, and but yep, that's kind of a testament, I think, to how the town is looked at, and people want to live here. So, and you know what? 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, I would have no problem walking the streets of Windermere, walking the roads and streets, wouldn't fear safety. There's a lot of other places I would not even think about doing that. Sometimes even during the day, let alone after dark. So yeah, it's it's a point well taken. I used to call it, "Hey, this is just like Mayberry," pretty much. I mean, the police, were always pretty friendly. I can remember my son had we got him a '66 Mustang. He wanted it. I went, all right, it's good, really, because we're talking, oh, the '90s, and he was interested in this classic car. And one day, he's like, got pulled over, Dad. What did you do? Nothing. He wanted to look at my car. That's Windermere.